And we do see that when individuals are able to give to organizations that resonate with them, they are also starting to participate more in the corporate initiatives that might have more strategic value to companies.
Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the show where we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders on what it takes to break through that business inertia and propel you and your business forward. I'm your host, Connie Steele. Many of the progressive leaders that we have featured on the show have something in common. They took stock of their life, redefined what their goals were, and pivoted their career so they could make an impact on the world while creating momentum personally. The same agile approach is required of companies as they seek to reshape their role and ideals, where it is about purpose and impact versus profit alone, all of which are increasingly important to a younger, more socially active workforce. Bryan de Lottinville, founder and CEO of Benevity, is a self-described recovering lawyer who found his higher purpose by changing the way companies can do well by doing good. Bryan created Benevity with the goal of transforming corporate philanthropy from a siloed, top-down activity to something that's infused into the daily life of a company. Through his technology platform, he's democratized giving through micro-donations, and this employee-centric approach gives more power to the workforce in deciding how and when to give. And in today's episode, Bryan shares what drove him to start his Goodness platform and why companies need to change the way they fundamentally think and deliver against their corporate social responsibility and corporate giving efforts. To start, Bryan talks about his early days as a lawyer, the transition to running one of the first multi-sided platform businesses named iStockPhoto, and the conversation with his daughter that ultimately changed his career trajectory.
I am what you describe as a recovering lawyer. So I started my career as a corporate finance lawyer and was a partner in a large firm in Toronto, and left law in what doesn't seem that long ago, but was in the mid-90s to take an operational role in an investee company of a pension fund client of mine. And it was an interesting sort of manufacturing company that was sort of disrupting the interior construction business with movable interior walls and things like that, and had a great sort of operational MBA there in the sense that we grew the business from 20 million in revenue to 300, a couple hundred people to 2,500 people, did an IPO, had a hostile takeover bid, had an auction, and sold it to a large U.S. company, all in the course of 6 years. So that was a great way for a lawyer to become a business person. And after that, I ran a company called iStockPhoto. It's now owned by Getty Images, as you may know, but it was one of the first multi-sided platform businesses that we now sort of see everywhere in the Ubers and Airbnbs and sort of the user-generated content, crowdsourcing, network effect type businesses, and was very disruptive at the time, as you may recall. I mean, Getty was charging $250 or so for an image, and iStockPhoto, which was using content provided by amateur and semi-professional photographers, we were charging, I think, $5 for our largest image and as little as $1 for smaller ones. And so obviously the quality of the imagery was not 250 times better. And so Getty bought the business when we were quite small, and in hindsight, we sold it, frankly, in typical Canadian fashion, a little bit too early. Not thinking big enough about it. And so after that, I started to think about, what I was going to do with the next phase of my career. And around the same time, my little daughter asked me what I did for a living. It was part of some sort of school project, I think. And I remember thinking that the answer was, I fix up companies and sell them for as much as I can, honey. I didn't give her that answer. I gave her a more mainstream answer, but it did get me thinking more seriously about my professional legacy and, better aligning my actions and my intentions. I had always, like many of us, wanted to leave the world a little better than I found it. And so I started poking around the nonprofit sector, in fact, thinking perhaps I could run a charity or an NGO of some kind. But I had neither the skill set nor the patience to deal with the governance model and some aspects of a pure nonprofit. And around the same time, I made an angel investment into a startup that was going to be a consuming for good loyalty program in Canada. And it ended up failing miserably, but it got me exposed to some metrics around the charitable landscape that I wasn't aware of. And this was 2006, 2007. So then 300 billion of donation volume in North America, less than 5% of it was online. And more notably, of that then 300 billion, now 440 billion, less than 5% of that came from corporations, notwithstanding the increased expectations for social responsibility and companies to be doing more than just pursuing profit and some of those sorts of things. So that was that idea, and that my thesis for why that situation existed was that companies were pursuing mostly a handout mentality when it came to CSR and giving back and community investment, as opposed to an investment opportunity mentality. And the thought was, if we could better integrate business impact and social impact, that companies would invest more in these things and we would increase social outcomes while we improved business outcomes. And so that was kind of the idea of Benevity. And we built a platform to enable companies to do that. And that was 2008. And so we've been at it since then. And I have been the privileged steward of a high growth company that is becoming something of a poster child for doing well by doing good.
Given that you have been in this really interesting career journey of being that lawyer to an operator to an entrepreneur and ultimately somewhat of a game changer, how has all of that led into you thinking about this goodness platform that you've created with Benevity?
Well, it's a complex thing to unpack in some respects. I come from a very humble background. I did not realize that we were poor, frankly, until I got into university and saw how other people lived. And so I've been very fortunate. I feel very fortunate to live in a country, on a continent where education can unlock opportunity. And so my appetite to give back and provide some mechanism to inspire other people in whatever small way I could to do that has always been part of what I wanted to do. Up until Benevity, I had never really manifest that in a meaningful way. It was, I'd go to the odd charity event, write the odd check, maybe participate in a United Way program at work where, I might be voluntold to donate to a charity selected by the company, and it never really resonated with me in a way that contributed toward an appetite for self-actualization. To use a scientific term about it. So I think that desire for meaning and purpose and impact, and perhaps even gratitude, is something that many people have, and in today's time-constrained world and the plethora of information and technology and social media and things like that, it's sometimes hard to find the time and make the effort to invest in that appetite for meaning and purpose and impact. And so that making that easier and doing it on scale and connecting with companies as the convener of that is I think a tremendous opportunity. One of the things that we discovered when we entered this space, and we've been creating something of a new category as a sort of corporate purpose platform, if you will, or a goodness platform, whatever term you want to use. But the why behind many of those programs historically was fundraising. So the The how typically translated into a very top-down, once-a-year, arm-twisting exercise in trying to hit a number, which, United Way and other organizations like that were very good at hitting the number. But if the goal was to engage people in causes that resonated with them personally in ways that might translate into them becoming more invested as sort of social activists and doing things like that, it's not a once a year exercise. And so as we have seen the evolution of the why, both from the company perspective and individuals, to be more about the pursuit of being your best self, and in the company's case, having a profile that and a corporate culture that has as part of its DNA a commitment to doing more than just pursuing profit and having purpose as a driver. We've seen, first of all, those companies outperform ones that don't, and we've seen individuals in our own data across. We looked at 120 companies last year, and we get a demographic file, so we can see employee churn, and the churn rate for people who were the most robust users of our software was 57% lower on average than the churn rate of non-users of our software. So not necessarily a causal relationship, but highly correlated. And so employee churn and attracting, retaining, and engaging people is a massive investment and opportunity for companies. So we are a B corporation because we're a perfect blend of hybrid goals.
Bryan's pursuit of a new career path that would align his intentions to give back with his actions of better integrating business and social impact led him to start Benevity. Having been involved in the disruption of other industries, Bryan inherently understood the power of technology and the network effect to change fundamental behavioral and business dynamics. And he saw the opportunity to do just that in the charitable giving and corporate philanthropy landscape.
About iStock Photo, I did get to see the power of network effect in that business. And it is part of what we are looking to achieve in Benevity as we gain more traction and scale, because we have an ecosystem view. We have 2 million nonprofits on one side, and so far about 600 fairly large enterprise clients on the other, representing 11 million employees and literally hundreds of millions of customers of those companies. So the opportunity to create a collaborative, experiential, culturally impactful investment in social impact is significant, and it benefits business, which we're seeing more and more in the news. So I remember one of the very early companies that saw the application, I think it was a VP of communications, was the decision maker, and she said, "Oh, I get it. You've turned giving from a chore into an experience." And as we were sort of scurrying to write down that tagline to use in our marketing, it is what we were trying to do then. It continues to be what we are trying to do now, and that is sort of meet people where they are, and companies for that matter, and move them along a path from what is often passive transactional interactions to richer experiential investments where they're co-owning and co-creating outcomes. And in doing so, they're moving along a path of engagement, both in their pursuit of being their best selves and perhaps creating a greater connection to their colleagues, their employer, their local communities, and things like that. So it truly is a win-win. And
absolutely. Well, so let's talk more about this continued movement towards corporate goodness. And certainly many of them are realizing the importance of serving a higher order purpose and not have profits be the leading goal. So what do you feel are the major challenges companies and even individuals continue to face today in terms of being able to deliver on this promise of doing good?
The principal challenge is mindset, I would say. Many companies, even ones that are embracing philanthropy and community investment, come at this with a top-down mentality rather than one that is focused on bottom up as well. And these can be an and, not an or, but this idea that I'm going to foist giving back upon my employees and force them to give to the corporate foundation or force them to give to one or two or five charities chosen by the organization, that is increasingly unlikely to succeed, especially when engagement is your goal. So, and especially with millennials who are increasingly going to be the largest cohort in the workforce. These folks, of course, have grown up in an entirely empowered, democratized online environment. They can customize their Nikes. They can build a car online. They can communicate through social media to literally millions of people. So the idea that you're going to fetter their choice or force them to give funds to one organization that decides where it goes, that's completely antithetical to how they have grown up and the expectations they have. So I would say mindset is the principal impediment. Well, I was going to say, and technology that enables them to deliver on that, right? So many companies might want broad choice, might want convenience, might want personal resonance, but they're managing it on an Excel spreadsheet and at a practical level can't possibly provide that capability. So I think in addition to changing the why, changing the how has been fundamental to seeing the growth in these areas.
This once-a-year, limited and narrow approach to corporate giving may hit company donation targets, but it does nothing to create a culture of goodness or sense of shared purpose within an organization. Further, this top-down mentality limits the success of any corporate social responsibility program, particularly with the millennial workforce, as they have been used to having a choice and a voice. By changing the how and marrying it with the higher order why, companies can now tap into this innate desire that many employees have for greater meaning, purpose, and impact. And the existing operational structure and experience around corporate giving today needs to be modernized, as Bryan explains.
There are aspects to our space that aren't that sexy, but they're very important. For instance, the number of, in a one-to-many context like ours, so this year we will probably distribute 1.6 billion or so to just under 200,000 global charities. And 88% of those payments will be electronic. That is a massive step forward in an industry where checks have been the predominant method of payment and distribution to organizations in this one-to-many context. And lost, stale-dated, misdirected, stuck in a drawer checks is absolutely an endemic problem in this space. And not to mention that we're flying these checks around. The cost of mailing, and we are the only continent in the world that still really uses checks. So that's just one part of kind of the social mission, is to aggregate, automate, and help with efficiency on the distribution side of the ecosystem. On the front end, I mentioned the expectations of employees and consumers around technology have made it such that, and the time constraints and everything else that we have going on, we need to be able to engage people using a consumer-grade user experience that has user centricity and, as I say, empowerment, choice, content, things that will move people from this transactional focus where I'm just doing the equivalent of sending a check to something that's actually contributing to my sense of self-efficacy as a person. And if I do that well, the goodwill that creates, and there's even neuroscience behind this stuff, but the goodwill that creates can attach to my relationship with my employer or even the provider of the good or service that I'm purchasing. So it's actually a tremendous opportunity to increase social outcomes in ways that authentically also improve businesses.
Well, and so what I've heard is that, because of the way that funds are being distributed, coupled with how donations seem to be happening too, which I know in other things you've said, it's really manual, it's fragmented, it's siloed, it's disaggregated. That in addition to this mindset of being more transactional and one and done, you've really looked at it in a fundamentally different way so that it can be one where you're addressing the efficiency of it. So this is continuous, it's sustainable, it is becoming more efficient, so that you can have people really self-actualize and ultimately reach that goal of engagement.
Agreed. And it's important to understand we don't consider our mandate to be donation volume or hours of volunteering time tracked or any of the other, even though those are metrics that are relevant to the business side of the business. Our goal is more behavior. And so those are incidents of what we do. They are not the goal of what we do. And that's why we've also got a module that is about purpose-driven behavior, small actions that people can take in their everyday lives that might be contributing toward different issues around content libraries that we provide, like sustainability and environmental stewardship, diversity and belonging, mental health, virtually any kind of topic that individuals might want to get a little bit of education around, and also have some small actions that they can take in their lives that are making progress toward addressing an issue, whether it's poverty or homelessness or mental health or addiction or whatever it happens to be. And in concert with behavior, there are also opportunities to give time, money, product, have companies make grants around those issues. So it's putting companies in a position where they've got a holistic platform to address issues in a movement-oriented way that includes their employees and customers. And we believe that's the path to greater success than these top-down investments have been making for many years.
Taking a bottoms-up perspective, coupled with a comprehensive understanding of how people want to give and engage, creates this shift from what Bryan calls the historically passive transactional interactions to richer experiential investments, ones that are personal and sustainable. It's enabling the power of small actions to make a significant difference, and that requires choice. Providing that optionality through Benevity's technology delivers an experience that isn't a one-size-fits-all.
There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to this. So you need to develop programs and take approaches where you can bring more people into the tent, which requires choice, which requires user centricity. It requires a different approach than a top-down, the same way, frankly, that brands are built these days much differently than they used to be, right? It used to be, let me tell you what my brand says. And now you can still do some of that, but ultimately you have to be listening to what the crowd is saying about your brand and figure out ways to authentically build that in a horizontal fashion. And what we're doing is not dissimilar to that. Companies can have some strategic direction for their community investment and giving back strategies, and ESG and some of these things with the Business Roundtable are making them more and more top of mind, moving them up into the C-suite of companies as opposed to just the CSR folks. But they need to do that by inclusion, not by foisting the choices upon the people. Otherwise, as I said earlier, you're just not going to engage them.
So it's shifting from this push mentality to more of a pull mentality by obviously giving them the options that most resonate for them.
Right, and they're doing the pulling. Often they're out working in. We get to see it in a small way in our own company. We've only got 650 people, but we have 90% participation using our own software without a hint of arm twisting, and it's a big reason why our employer net promoter score and our employee engagement scores are sort of off the charts compared to other companies. I truly believe it's our software, not the nature of the work we're doing, because and we have, of those 650 people, I think probably 575 of them are millennials. I raised the average age in a room I walk into by about 30 years. They are out there wanting to make a difference. They are, I think, far more engaged in social consciousness and a sense of wanting to make a difference than the boomer. Not that there aren't lots of boomers who are, but my approach to it would have been more of a box ticking exercise than I mentioned, giving the odd check or attending charity events and things like that. These folks want to get in there, be interactive, have transparency, have accountability, see impact. These are important things to make a difference in the world, and important if you're building technology to service them, that you consider those expectations.
Being able to create that difference in the world also necessitates having a corporate culture that aligns to a company's purpose. And Benevity has been able to do just that for its clients by enabling those important connections.
You're infusing that positive culture of goodness into other organizations by showing them a different way of how to contribute and make a greater impact on the world. And you've done it in a way down to the micro level, to that individual, where you're giving people that power to make a difference in the smallest way. But when you connect that all together, it scales significantly and has a greater impact at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we do see that when individuals are able to give to organizations that resonate with them, they are also starting to participate more in the corporate initiatives that might have more strategic value to companies. So by contrast, if I know I can't give to my obscure little autism charity in your program, I'm not going to go in there. So you have zero chance of connecting me to the corporate initiatives that might better align with the sort of shared value initiatives or strategic kind of initiatives that a company might pursue, whether that's STEM or whatever, clean water or whatever it happens to be. The volunteering threshold is an example of sort of a change that you can make that really drives participation. There are others that are equally simple, like we had a client that was in a particular business, and the organizations that they enabled their employees to give to were related directly to that business and only those charities. So I think there were 4 of them. Not everyone who works in that business is going to care about that. And if you, instead of just choosing those 4 organizations, if you open it up to open choice and match more aggressively to those organizations, you're still creating that emphasis on organizations that are strategic, but you're getting far more people who will go into the software and start to interact with it. And their participation rate went up 300% in 2 years in a row, just by opening up the program to things that mattered to the individuals. And coincidentally, donations to the 4 favored organizations also went up. So that's kind of getting back to what I was talking about before about mindset. There's this kind of leftover idea that top down is the way to go in these things, and it's just it's people needing to sort of let go of that and embrace the idea that their employees and perhaps even their customers will do the right thing on their own terms, and ultimately that will raise all the boats.
Benevity has redefined, retooled, and reshaped the conventional approach to philanthropy and corporate social responsibility. And through their technology platform, they've also been able to facilitate a greater level of transparency and insight than what has traditionally existed.
So we have really 2 two challenges or opportunities as a business. We are selling our software to companies principally, and their mindset around these things. There's a value proposition that resonates with them. That isn't just wanting to do more good in the world, but that is an increasingly relevant piece. But the typical corporate mindset is if you can't measure it, it somehow doesn't matter. Some of the things that we are doing are part of what you might describe as intangible assets of a company. Your corporate culture is increasingly relevant in attracting and retaining and engaging people. It's increasingly relevant in your reputation and the level of trust that consumers have in you and your brand and things like this. So some of the appetite for measurement is very difficult to satisfy. But I mentioned earlier that employee engagement survey or analysis we did around employee turnover. That got a lot of attention because it was the HR folks paying attention all of a sudden to something that might have historically or in their company was philanthropy, and it was over in a silo, and we really didn't pay much attention to it. But when you start connecting the dots around human behavior and the impact that it has on corporate performance, then the need for data and the opportunity to use it is significant. We've got some clients that have correlated giving back activity, giving money, giving time with promotion and seen a positive correlation, not only in reduced turnover, but increased promotions from people who are performing these sort of acts of goodness, if you will. So it's an interesting area that we're trying to do more in, and you're only able to do as much work with analytics and insights as you do have demographic data. So it's sometimes tricky when you don't know the gender, you don't know the geography, you don't know the title. So we're trying to work harder at getting companies to share more demographic information so that we can help them understand their folks. And obviously, we are not ever going to monetize our data the way that an advertising-based model or whatever would. But if we don't get it, then we can't help the charities and we can't help the companies understand the opportunities and the behavior. So it's a balance.
With this ability to collect and analyze the behavioral data, Benevity's corporate social responsibility and employee engagement software creates the opportunity to prove the value of offering these corporate goodness programs. And with the tangible metrics around the impact of doing good, it can create that positive domino effect that can lead to greater business investment.
We have lots and lots of companies that are using our software. They are typically fairly under-resourced in their companies, even very large companies. So it puts a lot of pressure on us and our platform to do a lot of the lifting for companies. But the more the ROI, if you will, starts to get understood around investing in corporate purpose and goodness, the more this will become something that companies actively invest in rather than treat it like a sort of nice to have. And we're seeing a lot of data now from the institutional investor community around how environmental, social, and governance issues are a lens through which companies are being examined as to their identity and efficacy, and the correlation between high performance and positive ESG profile is also evolving and becoming more commonly known. So I think it's all boding well for society to see as we evolve the notion of companies and what's important and how they treat their people, both current and retired. And Larry Fink and the Business Roundtable folks have been doing a lot in the last year or so to kind of emphasize the evolution of the role of companies, which is interesting.
What would be great is if you could share some other examples within some of the companies that you've worked with on how they've exactly used it and ways that you'll reflect each of those areas that we talked about, where I know you've got obviously a range of them, but you have employee engagement. What were some of the ways that they completely redid their employee engagement program, or workplace given, or volunteering, or grants management?
I mean, there's so many examples because, brag a little bit, but, what we've seen is with our clients, when they implement the software in their first year of implementation, the average increase in participation, I think, is 22%. It goes up to something like 40% in the second year as they start to implement best practices. A lot of companies who have been doing this have been doing it a certain way because it was either manually managed or just because that's always the way it's been done. An example might be in the area of volunteering rewards. So lots of companies have what's called dollars for doers rewards, or they basically provide donation currency incentive to volunteering. And it's typically done with a pretty high hurdle. So if I volunteer 40 hours, I can apply for a $500 or whatever the number might be, volunteer grant that goes to the organization that I volunteered with. And that's a very high hurdle, especially if you're a single mom or single dad and you do 25 hours of volunteering. You're still invested in your community, but in terms of feeling like you're included in the company's program and valued for that participation, you're not.
That sounds like a big bang kind of approach. Sort of like one and done. Let's do this big bang. That's what it is. A really high hurdle, but it limits somebody's ability to fully engage.
And it's kind of consistent with that once a year mindset, or that kind of binary, you're either in or out. And so we try and encourage our clients to reward volunteering from hour one by, picking a number, 10. Typically companies are ranging somewhere between $10 and $25 per hour, up to a cap. That cap might be integrated with the match cap that they offer, so that an individual employee can manage their own opportunities. Some of them have more time than money. Others might want to give more money and are constrained for time. But in both cases, you're kind of using technology to enable participation with less friction. And on the company side, I mean, part of the reason they have those thresholds is there was probably an individual writing those checks, and so they wanted to make sure that that was a manageable piece. So, we've got companies that are supporting north of 20,000 nonprofit organizations in their employee population. That would be a lot for someone to manage from the corner of their desk on an Excel spreadsheet. So some of the hurdles and approaches, as I say, are a function of the absence of robust technology in the past. But part of our challenge is, once they implement software that was built for a different purpose and a different approach, getting them to sort of change their practices sometimes takes some time, which is why that growth rate sort of spikes from the second year rather than immediately.
And it really sounds like you're really enabling that power of one, and being able to create that ongoing iterative contribution, so in small increments, such that it can be that continuous behavior versus that, as we talked about, the transactional big bang approach that it's traditionally been. And you've done that through eliminating the friction through your technology.
Yeah, and I have a bias. I really believe in the power of culture, both in a company and in society. And I think, Benevity's little vision is to be a catalyst to infuse a culture of goodness into the world. We figure if Google can organize the world's information, we can at least infuse goodness into the world. It's lofty, but if we achieved it, and we were, we had a little more of a more for we mentality, not in a socialist sort of way necessarily, but just as opposed to the me as victim, more for me. Some of the sentiments that are really kind of driving the populist movement in political circles, that there is absolutely little question that we would have a better shot at solving some of the complex social issues that we have been pouring billions of dollars into for many years in a principally top-down sort of high net worth and corporate grant-making model. If we can add to that the power of individuals, that collective army of one, if you will, we have a much better chance of solving them.
Bryan's career pivot has taken him from a place of wanting to deliver meaningful change as an individual to helping companies bring their social mission to life by activating the power of every individual in their organization. So how has this definition of career success evolved over time?
One of the things that has become really clear to me is that working for money, while necessary, will never be sufficient. And if you can't connect your work, which is something we do for the vast majority of our time, to something that provides some sense of visceral kind of purpose and meaning, then all the money in the world is not going to make you engaged in your role. And so I have been fortunate with a couple of those companies that were sold to be in a position where my financial situation, which was the early part of my mindset when I was working, I was really originally probably thinking, we never owned a house, right? My parents didn't own a house ever, before or after, and so I wanted to achieve things in my career so that I could, the most successful I ever felt in my life before or still was buying my mother a house, many years ago. But, when you take, and unfortunately lots of people are in a position where that the financial part of their work is not a source of security for them. So they may not get freed up to recognize that, it doesn't have purpose and meaning by itself. I would argue that no matter how much money you're making, there is room in your world to give back, and that will have you feeling more enriched than buying a nicer car or a bigger house ever will. So that was probably my definition of success used to include money more than it does now, and I think my children will be better off for it. I'm inspired by our youth generally, but in particular, my kids don't talk about anything that doesn't typically include some, I got a little son who's constantly inventing things in his mind, and they always have some way that he's going to integrate the Benevity platform into the business. So, it's just, I don't know if that's articulated as clearly, but my career success actually left me realizing how empty some of it was, frankly, and that my intentions to, as I said before, leave the world better than I found it weren't really being realized by selling companies. And they're still quite macro. Benevity is making an impact, but it's, I'm finding myself needing to get more involved on the ground to feel an even deeper sense of impact. We met with the mayor of our city here last week, and we're trying to do something big in Calgary around mental health and addiction over the next few months, just so that we can sort of look at this and say, okay, we helped do that. And I just think people's appetite for impact is more important than they realize sometimes in terms of career pursuits.
Yes, and I would say actually that seems to be a growing trend, particularly as you mentioned with millennials all wanting to align that purpose and passion with whatever they're career pursuits ultimately will be. And knowing what you know now, what advice would you tell your younger self?
Again, I'm not sure you have enough time for my response in that, but I would say, if I had to distill it to a single thing, it would be don't let anyone but the very best version of yourself decide what you're capable of. I didn't necessarily think of myself as an entrepreneur because I don't have for one thing, I'm an introvert. I was a lawyer. I mean, I was trained to sort of identify problems and risks, not be indefatigably optimistic about the absence of them. And yet I have built with a lot of help a company from scratch that has 650 people and is looking to hire another couple of hundred over the next 12 to 18 months. So I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur, and perhaps had I thought that way sooner, I might have done some things differently. I really don't look backwards with regret, though, because my path has been my path, and it all, as trite as it sounds, it all happens for a reason, and I just feel grateful, frankly, for the journey that I've had.
And to close, any last words of wisdom?
There are so many people who are better qualified than me, but as I said, I think working for money is necessary, but it's never going to be sufficient. I think that for young folks, there's much to learn. Make sure that you have the humility to grow, and be self-aware enough to keep a growth mindset in all that you do. And I would say we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and try to start with the why. Like, one of the reasons I have been successful in my career is I am chronically dissatisfied with the status quo, and I want, we have at Benevity, we stole the Nike mantra, "There's always better," and it is how we try and approach both our products and our service and our approach to our vision. And I think it's a powerful, the appetite to make positive change is a catalyzing thing. So that's it. My words of wisdom.
And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Yeah, probably by email. My email is just Bryan with a Y at Benevity.com. And I will enjoy interacting with your listeners.
Thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing how there's always a better way to deliver corporate goodness, and particularly in the world of philanthropy.
Well, thank you, Connie. I enjoyed it.
Realizing everyone's desire to do good requires transforming the how, as well as understanding that there is a higher order why. And that takes integrating the business impact and social impact as organizations recognize that purpose and profit can't be mutually exclusive. By leveraging the power of one and the small actions employees can take every day, your company can create tremendous impact and sustainable success around corporate goodness programs. And in the end, it enables you to fulfill your social mission and build a positive corporate culture. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. To connect with Bryan, you can contact him at bryan@benevity.com. That's BRYAN at BENEVITY.com. And to learn more about his company, you can visit benevity.com. If you've liked what you heard, please share this podcast with others so they too can benefit from Bryan's valuable wisdom and advice. To get show notes, links, and more tips and advice from this episode, you can visit us at strategicmomentum.co/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.